All right. Well, Ken, if you're happy for me to kick off, it is a couple of minutes past 2:00, and I think we've got everyone in from the waiting room. So with that in mind, let's get underway. I'll be making some introductory remarks. So on that note, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today's the Commission's public forum on our draft decision for Central Highlands Water. My name is Kate Simons, and I'm the chairperson of the Essential Services Commission. Just to let you know, this forum is being recorded to ensure access for those unable to attend today. So any statement, comment or question you make will be included in the recording, which we plan to make available on our website. To start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands wherever you are today. For me, that's the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and waters of the service area of Central Highlands Water. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people who may be here today. Well, thanks very much for taking the time to come together this afternoon. First, I'd like to introduce staff from the Commission. We have with us today our Executive Director of Price Monitoring and Regulation, Marcus Crudden. And we've also got a number of other members of our water team at the Commission too online, so a number of people around the table from the Commission. From the Central Highlands Water business, I'd like to welcome Jeff Hayden, Managing Director. Thanks very much, Jeff. And I think we've got a couple of other representatives from Central Highlands Water who will be involved in the presentation as well. So I think we've got Philip and Philippa, I think, so welcome. Thanks very much for all the other people on the call for making the time to join us today. Just before we get to the agenda, some quick housekeeping. If you've got any questions or comments while someone's talking, please feel free to type them into the chat so we can build these into the conversation. It'd be great to keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking to avoid feedback and background noise. And in addition to your participation today, you can also provide written feedback via the Engage Victoria website. Please do let us know if there's another preferred option for how we engage with you. We're always very open to feedback and making it as easy as possible for you to engage with us on this important consultation. The web address for Engage Victoria will be on the slides we're about to start sharing with you at all for your reference. Now, just the purpose and agenda for today, I'll use the first part of today's forum just to give you a brief introduction to our role in price regulation. But as always, the main purpose for this event is to hear from you directly and answer any questions you might have on our draft decision, and the business is here to likewise answer any questions that you might have for them. To help shape today's discussion, we will cover how we've assessed the price submission and our draft decision for Central Highlands Water. Then Central Highlands Water, via Jeff, Philip and Philippa, I think, will have the opportunity to respond to our draft decision, and then we will have an opportunity to hear directly from you. So thanks for making the time to do that today. We do appreciate being able to have an open and honest conversation with you today. Insights from these engagements absolutely help us shape our decisions as we move from draft to final. Just a little bit about us. We regulate Victoria's energy, water and transport sectors, and we oversee the Fair Go rate system. We also administer the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program. We have been regulating water prices for more than 20 years, including for Central Highlands Water. For the water sector, we approve prices and service standards. We monitor and report on performance, and we also administer customer service codes. We are currently reviewing new water prices to apply from 1 July 2023 for 14 water businesses in Victoria. The prices we approve reflect an assessment of the efficient costs water businesses need to recover to provide valued services to customers. Following consultation, we then issue a determination that sets the maximum prices that Central Highlands Water may charge customers. I'd now like to pass over to Marcus Crudden, who's going to step us through how we assess the price submission from Central Highlands Water and our draft decision, and then we'll move from that to Jeff from Central Highlands Waters for a response to our draft decision. So I'll hand over to you now. Thanks very much, Marcus.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome everybody this afternoon. We'll take you just quickly through, I guess, some of the main things that have come up in our assessment of Central Highlands Water. Of course, all the issues are actually set out in our draft decision, which is available online. Our task is we have to assess Central Highlands price submission to ensure it complies with what is known as the Water Industry Regulatory Order. That is an instrument set by government, and that basically sets the rules we need to follow, and also Central Highlands in their submission. We also, under that order, are required to issue guidance before a price review. So we set out guidance about our expectations of the overall approach. We also have an incentive framework known as the Primo framework, which has bonuses for outperformance based on the level of ambition of the businesses. There's also need to ensure that things comply with relevant criteria under the Water Industry Act and the Essential Services Commission Act. It's a reasonably complex legal framework with lots of obligations that need to be met and followed. It's also really important to understand that what we assess is Central Highland Water's proposal. So we don't get the second guess, we don't substitute alternative approaches. We get to look at what they're put before us, and we're required to assess those against these criteria and the guidance paper. So it's not our regulator sets the direction, it's Central Highlands' proposal on its own, and they're responsible, and it's up to Jeff and his team to put it together, but also then implement it after the event. So next slide. In assessing Central Highlands' proposed surface standards, our draft decision does indicate whether we propose to approve or not approve. Now, the legal framework is we either approve things or we're not approved what action Central Highlands needs to take to gain approval. So this is the draft at this stage. So the opportunity is for Central Highlands to respond to all the things we've identified here, and also yourselves as other stakeholders can also respond to the matters that will then come to a draft decision. We'll move from the draft decision to a final decision and a price determination, and that price determination is binding. Should also note there's a slight technical nature to the legal aspect here, that in some instances we'll be saying it's not approved, and it may well be that the issue is not that they've done a bad job, but there's just consequential things. So if there's changes in expenditure, it means, for example, the revenue requirement's not approved. It doesn't mean Central Highlands has done something particularly wrong or bad, but it's an aspect of saying this is not approved because it may follow from other aspects just flowing through to that. Next slide, please. At the current process, we're wanting submissions in by the 12th of May. We're anticipating final decisions sort of mid-June, and new prices will commence on 1st of July, and they'll occur for the 5-year period from then. So next slide. So when we're assessing the proposal, we look at the engagement and how Central Highlands Water has used that feedback to shape its proposal. We expect expenditure and demand forecasts. We verify underlying supporting assumptions and data built into it. We evaluate how Central Highland Water is managing risk on behalf of customers and how it's performed over the last 5 years against its last price submissions. This is the first time performance has been part of the Primo assessment. We also review the operating expenditure and capital expenditure, looking at both the costings and the timing assumptions to ensure they are reasonable. So we have an obligation to look at the prudency and efficiency of that investment. With that, we obtain sort of arm's length independent expert consulting work done by sort of some quite senior external engineers. So they provide advice which we consider informing our views on the operating expenditure benchmarks. Next slide, please. In our draft decision, we've accepted the 5-year pricing period with prices, I think, decreases, so in real terms over the 5 years. We've proposed to accept many elements of the price submission, including the demand forecast, the tariff baskets, the form of price control, and the tariff structures. We're adopting a revenue requirement of $528.9 million over the period. We've asked Central Highlands to provide its transition plan for achieving full cost reflectivity for new customer contributions. We've also how it explains to deal with running high impacts of inflation over the period, noting it's high. This is the highest inflation we've sort of faced since we've commenced water pricing in 2004. We're also asking you to demonstrate how it's considered updated population and dwelling growth figures. Now, these were updated by the Victorian government a few months ago, so this is not necessarily to do anything wrong, but to take account of the most recent data in those considerations. Next slide. These are the proposed prices set out in the price submission, with the inflation being announced a few days ago. That it does mean next year's bills will go from $1,231 to $1,317, so an increase of around $60. So it's sort of significant that inflation figure will flow through into bills. And that is one of those things I'm sure Jeff will comment in his presentation, that it is we recognise the severe rise. We also recognise that Central Highlands is looking at additional customer support in regard to customers facing these price rises. Next slide, Lucy. Overall, we made some adjustments to the operating and capital expenditures. Operating expenditures, there some adjustments to the baseline starting position, and we've been working with Central Highlands since the release of the draft decision to clarify that opening base number, so a change in that flows through to other years. And there's some relatively minor adjustments to the capital expenditure program, and we'll expect Jeff and the team will come back to us on those adjustments and potentially provide us some additional information. As we noted, this is a draft, not a sort of final decision on these matters, so there's the opportunity to respond to those and clarify issues or provide more detail. Next slide. As you can see, the capital expenditure over this period has been pretty good and tracking fairly well compared to forecasts. That Central Highlands has done quite a good job there, that costs have increased across the sector, that there's been, particularly the last couple of years, a very heated civil construction market, which really has put input costs and has put cost pressures on the water businesses. And this is not something unique to Central Highlands, it's something we're seeing right across the sector. We have been satisfied that they've delivered by slightly higher, that their expenditure is in keeping with what they'd forecast and expected to deliver over this period. Over the next period, capital is a bit higher. That's a pretty consistent pattern across the water sector and does reflect some of those increased input and construction costs that are occurring. So it is actually a challenging environment for water businesses at the current point in time. So, Lucy. Operating expenditure, that again have been a bit above forecast. This is again a pattern that right across the sector, that people have tended to spend more over the current 5 years than expected. It really has been particularly challenging over the last year or two, that input costs have risen more than perhaps anyone expected, and there have been some unavoidable changes in some areas like chemicals and insurance that has flowed right across the sector. Operating costs running forward are sort of showing an incline, and that's perhaps the area where we have made some adjustments and asking for further information and justification of that. So, Lucy. Under the Primo framework, we propose to accept a standard rating. So we consider Central Highlands has met expectations of delivering across its outcomes in the current period. Its engagement programs have given opportunities to participate and provide feedback on prices and services that affect, and the engagement has been inclusive and diverse. It proposed outcome measures and targets in consultation with customers and supported by customers. There's some elements there that we've asked them to come back on, but overall they've improved in customer value over the time. Next slide. Excluding inflation, price will remain steady in 23-24, then increased by 1% each year in 24-25 and 27-28, noting inflation will be added to those. Slides are going backwards for some reason there. Next slide. Customers will continue to receive services as now, with some improvements in those. And Central Highlands will continue to reduce its environmental footprint, like the rest of the water sector. It will be moving to 100% renewable energy by 2025, and it will be responding to the challenges of climate change. So, So Lucy. If you go through, I'll hand back to Kate there to introduce Jeff Hayden.
Thanks very much, Marcus. And as Marcus mentioned, Jeff, thanks for being here today, and I'll hand over to you to present Central Highlands Water's response to our draft decision, and then we can get to a Q&A session after that. So over to you. Thanks very much, Jeff.
Great, thanks, Kate. And I think we've got a couple of slides as well. Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Marcus, for that overview. Also like to thank and acknowledge all the ESC people on the call today for the work that we've been doing together over a period of time. Also welcome customers, any community members and key stakeholders that are joining the session today, and also acknowledge that we've got members of our development community here on this session as well. Just in terms of introduction, Jeff Hayden, I'm the Managing Director at Central Highlands Water. We've got Philippa O'Sullivan, PIP, who's the General Manager of Customer and Business Services, and also Phil Anstis as well, who's been our Project Director in the development of the pricing submission. So I'd like to acknowledge both those people, and also the teams of people at CHW who have contributed to putting this together, particularly the deep dive engagement that we've had with our customers and community over the last 12 to 18 months certainly needs to be acknowledged. Also, Central Highlands Water acknowledges the traditional owners of the region that we work on, many registered Aboriginal party traditional owners as outlined on the screen today. We pay our respects to the elders of these communities, both past and present. And I also acknowledge any Aboriginal people on the call today and the land on which you're coming to this meeting also. Thank you. Just a little bit of context before I hand over to Phil, who's going to give us some of the highlights and just recap on the pricing submission, and particularly the input and the engagement that formed our submission, and also some conversation about our response. A little bit of context for CHW. We're experiencing unprecedented rapid growth that we've never seen before. We've come off a base of many pricing submissions before where it's been relatively steady growth, and also inflation at much lower levels than what it is today. But we service a big area. Ballarat certainly our largest, our regional city, which is sort of around about 85% of our population base. We have 10 to 12,000 population up in the Maryborough area in Dalesford, but we've got a really important role in all of our small communities. So we've got 15 separate water supply systems, and we service an area of Dean, a small township of only 18 connections, which is just as important to our organisation as any other service area. So, population growth that Phil will talk about continues to be a big challenge and an opportunity. Like many other water authorities across the state, climate change is really a key part of our thinking and our planning. And we've certainly had no shortage of climate events that have, impacted, what we've had to do and respond to over the last couple of years as well. So, but asset base at, $1.5 billion, big part of our responsibility is to ensure that we keep those assets in appropriate condition to be able to provide excellent customer service. Thank you. I'll move over and I'll hand over to Phil just to provide a little bit more context on some key drivers that we were thinking about in developing this plan.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. Good to be with you this afternoon. We thought we'd just quickly skim through the key drivers, and Marcus, I think you may have mentioned some of these in your initial remarks as well, that the COVID-19 pandemic has really changed the shape of Victoria, of metropolitan Melbourne, and lots of service agencies, including Central Highlands Water. So we haven't been immune from the increasing cost pressures, and a lot of those are now baked into our ongoing cost structure, if you like. And we've certainly made that pretty clear in our price submission, and I think that's been recognised as well. The other key message that Jeff certainly touched on there, the key driver, and the graph to the right-hand side of the chart there shows is the rapid and sustained population growth we've been experienced. Initially, we thought it was perhaps a one-off flight from metropolitan Melbourne to regional Victoria, but further research and understanding that we've done makes us realise that this is a sustained change in population patterns across Victoria. This is certainly confirmed by the latest VIF 2021 figures as well. So that puts challenge on the business, and we can see the red arrow there indicates the uplift from our ongoing rate of 1.7% to 3.1%, then 2.6%. And the year-to-date figures we've currently got are 2.4%, with still a couple of months to go. So we see a sustained uplift in the rate of growth going forward, and that changes the nature of the business. It changes the nature of the investment profile we require to deliver sustainable services in a sustainable way. And looking at the requirement for serviceable lots through the community, the Victorian state planning requirements to have at least 15 years capacity of serviceable lots. Ballarat certainly doesn't have that. And if we look at the 5 growth zones being activated across Ballarat, there's around about 32,000 lots planned for development. Obviously Ballarat is our largest centre, and it really drives the growth right across the business. So as a result of this sustained levels of growth, we can see that our plan incorporates allowances to service approximately a 30% increase in the growth rate from 1.7% to 2.2%, and we think that is certainly going to be sustained over the planning period. Just moving on to the next slide, and but we just worthy of a very quick recap of our 5-year value proposition, really focusing on 3 outcomes and 14 outputs in terms of new and improved services. It's a numerically smaller number from our current regulatory period, but we think the outputs we're delivering are of more value and of more importance to our customers, and have been developed in great detail through a deliberative assembly process. We're increasing our GSR customer rebates by at least 50%, and as mentioned, a real focus on greenhouse gas emission reductions. Big number there on the right-hand side is our capital expenditure increasing by 62% over the period to $256 million. 45% of this we estimate will be spent on growth assets. Also a large investment in our ICT digital uplift to support our customers' expectations, to be effective in the digital world, to maintain cyber security expectations as well. We've identified additional staff to help deliver us on these priorities, and they're coming into the organisation now and getting settled so that we can hit the 1st of July running to deliver this quite ambitious program to really support the growth aspirations of our community. Speaking of that, we've been engaging with our developer community over the past couple of years as well, since May 21, to look at reforming new customer contributions, which have generally been recognised to be too low for too long. And you can see on the screen there, we're proposing an increase from $1,500 to $8,000 per lot. In engaging with our developer community, we heard loud and clear some key messages that not only have the NCCs been too low for too long, potentially hampering development in our region, but also very keen to see a transition over the price period, so there's not a price shock and a differential between new and existing growth zones, and also to respect existing arrangements. So we've been able to signal those commitments in our price submission, and we're happy to work through with the ESC on delivering on our final commitments. That also reduces cross subsidies from our existing customer base, which limits increases on prices for our customers. We are looking at the first price increase, real price increase that is, for about 10 years or so. We're aware that the current impact is there's lots of impacts on pricing pressures on our customers, and we're very keen to double our support for our vulnerable customers from $250,000 a year to $500,000 per year, or $2.5 million over the period, just to help customers who may need that financial assistance. Just taking a step back, our engagement program, we certainly lifted the effort and the intensity across our region for about an 8 or 9 month period, starting off with our stage 1, getting in front of our communities. We had a particular focus on getting in front of our communities in low income areas, speaking specifically of areas like Clunes, Delacombe, Wendouree West and Maryborough. So potentially where customers are doing a little bit hard, we wanted to hear from them directly. We conducted a whole range of customer surveys to hear customers' priorities. And you can see we had an interesting way of engaging with customers that was a bit different, a bit fresh, and really was an icebreaker to start speaking with customers. Stage 2 built on stage 1. We spoke with broader representative groups, including our customer advisory panel, stakeholder workshops, including our Careflow advisory group, which consists of a number of support agencies right across our region, and also our developer group as well in the local community. Stage 3, we brought it all together with a deliberative assembly, which we undertook for the first time. And we wanted to do that because we knew that the challenges we were facing would require some pretty intense discussions with customers in terms of what trade-offs were acceptable, what value did customers ascribe to different parts of our price submission. And we were really blown away by the intensity of the interest customers showed in those 3.5 Sundays to reach the final deliberations. 39 customers randomly selected from across our region with all sorts of characteristics that were really valuable to determining these trade-offs, such as more than half of our group were concession card holders. So we had some really interesting discussions with those particular groups. We had representation from the ATSI community, the LBGTIQ+ community, the cold community as well, and representation from right across our geographic region. So we're very confident that the discussions we had are representative of what customers are really interested in and are willing to pay. And obviously the pricing pathway was fully endorsed by our customer group as well. So we have a high degree of confidence in the quality of our outcomes, our outputs, and our pricing pathway. Very briefly, so these are the 3 outcomes we mentioned at the start of the session: customer care, equity, and sustainability. And I won't go through each of those measures, but you can see under customer care, we really are making sure we get back to the customers in a timely manner, improving our guaranteed service levels. We're increasing our rebates. We have a couple of priority rebates in there where the rebate dollar amount will actually double to signify that degree of importance to our customers. Equity is driven by a few key areas there. Water quality focus for 3 of our small regions that receive non-drinking quality water. But again, our customer group were very keen to see what else we can do for those communities. So we're keen to get in front of those communities and work closely with them over the coming 5-year period. Support for vulnerable customers. I think we're one of about 3 or 4 water corps that are doubling our financial commitment to our vulnerable customers through a range of programs. And also we're very keen to measure the impact of those vulnerable customer support programs. Importantly, we're upping our relationship and partnerships with our traditional owner groups through the community, working on a number of programs and making some additional investment commitments there. And again, all these initiatives are fully supported by our deliberative assembly group after 3.5 days of very intensive discussions. Not forgetting sustainability in 4 key areas there, where we are hoping to move the dial on each one of those 4 important areas. So I'll just quickly finish up on this final slide and then open up for some discussion. So our response to the ESC's draft decision is due on the 12th of May, and we're working through a number of issues there that have been identified by the ESC. We certainly welcome their independent scrutiny of our price submission, and they've certainly raised a number of matters for us to have a look at in more detail. So we're currently working through those at the moment. We'll be providing further information and clarification where requested, and there's a couple of items where we'll be providing further justification. And there's certainly a number of observations that the ESC have made that we completely agree with as well. So that's a quick recap of where we've come from and where we're going to. And perhaps I'll stop sharing the slides now and pass back over to the ESC to facilitate any conversation. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Jeff and Philip, for that presentation. As you say, Philip, really good to open up the conversation now for some feedback. So with that in mind, it's really useful for us to hear some views outside the Commission on anything that's been raised today or on other topics or concerns. So it'd be really great to hear from some of the stakeholders around the table today of any areas of feedback or concern or query. So just a reminder before we kick that off that this public forum is being recorded. That does mean that any statement or comment you make or question you ask will be included in the recording. And any question you ask using the chat function will also be read out along with your name and will be included in the recording for transparency. So for verbal comments, please feel free to use the raise the hand function. The team are there to help me see if that's been popped up, and you'll be invited to unmute your microphone, turn on your camera and say your name and organisation. If you're calling in via phone, please say your name and location prior to speaking. And as I said, really great opportunity to hear directly from stakeholders and we can respond or pass it on to the business to do so. With that in mind, let's open it up. I've seen a couple of cameras go on, so feel free to pop your hand up and ask any questions that you'd like to, or pop something in the chat. I think we do have a few representatives from the developer community, I think, from the list of attendees that I saw. So I know you're in the room. Yes, I can see, I think that might be Natasha O'Brien's hand up with a room with some developer representatives wanting to have a chat. So really keen to hear your views. I know we have a submission from you already. So an opportunity to hear directly on any other feedback or queries you'd like to raise. So perhaps I'll hand over to you. I think I'm handing over to Natasha that I can see in the room. Welcome.
Well, thanks, Kate. Natasha O'Brien from Integra. Got Darren Truk here, our project development manager, and he's just got a few questions.
So yeah, I won't try and throw Natasha's voice, so I'll use my own voice. So yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity. It's really appreciated, and I'd just like to, I suppose, congratulate first of all Central Highlands Water. They have really engaged with the development community throughout this process, with a number of forums and opportunities for the development community to put forward their thoughts. So first of all, we've really appreciated that from Central Highlands Water. I suppose, not surprisingly, my question's around growth, being a developer. Interested to, I think one of the comments I saw come up from the Essential Service Commission was for Central Highlands to demonstrate how they considered population and dwelling growth. As both Phil and Jeff have sort of announced, Ballarat's in a unique position, unfortunately, where our availability of land is well below 15 years, considerably below 15 years. There's some dispute whether it's 4 or 7 or whatever else, but so be it, it is significantly below 15 years to the point where the state government has recognised Ballarat as a significant in critical land terms of land supply. So we're very keen and been really, I suppose, impressed and sort of governed by Central Highlands in the way they've approached that. So I was most surprised to see in the response that Central Highlands submission for, I'll be corrected, about $1.5 million to plan for future growth and to be shovel ready in PR28 was not back. That to me, and I'd be corrected to say that the City of Ballarat have announced that there's new growth boundaries, and I stand to be corrected, but the reason it was knocked back was that there may not have been a submission on the Minister's desk to rezone the land at this point in time. Our thoughts are that is imminent within the next water plan, and I'm just very concerned that with our current land supply and not planning to PR28, puts Ballarat significantly further behind the 8 ball to a point where it will become astronomical from a point of view in land supply in Ballarat. So I'm just interested to get some rationale behind why that $1.5 million for planning to be shovel ready in PR28 was knocked back.
Thanks very much for opening up that area of conversation, and particularly around that critical area of growth from Integra's point of view. Jeff, before I open up more broadly, did you want to add anything into the comments and feedback that's already been added on that particular issue? And then I might call on the Commission as well.
Yep. Thanks, Kate, and thanks, Darren and the Integra team. We certainly value, the working relationships, the conversations that we've had. It's been particularly important working through, clearly probably the most uncertain, period around land use planning that we have in the Ballarat area. as you all know at the table, you know, a lot of the development has been particularly in the Ballarat West urban growth zone. So it's provided some clarity for developers, clarity for servicing authorities. We've got a situation up here now where you've got potentially multiple new growth fronts, precinct structure plans, all of, you know, 8 to 10,000 new lots potentially to come on board, which was articulated in our slide where we showed, you know, there's planning going on for another 30,000 lots. Victorian, for a little bit of context for everybody on the call, so the Victorian Planning Authority are doing some work at the moment, certainly working with the development sector, working with Central Highlands Water, and importantly, City of Ballarat, the local planning authority, to do some work probably about what Darren raised, maybe some of the uncertainty about how many years of land supply we actually have. Given there's certainly an aim in local government to maintain 15 years of supply. So we're very keen to understand the outcome from the Victorian Planning Authority's piece of work, but we also understand that they're working, and particularly the City of Ballarat, about identifying, coming out of the back of the supply and demand work is really, okay, so what is the next new growth zone, where would that be, and when's that actually required? So what I'm trying to articulate here is that there's a high degree of uncertainty at the moment that we've never experienced before. We certainly did get the clarity through both the City of Ballarat and the Minister for Planning that a new northern growth area is certainly hasn't been rezoned yet, certainly proposed to be rezoned, and that has certainly been confirmed to us as the priority. But there is a number of other growth areas that are still waiting for this final piece of work to share with all of the relevant stakeholders. Central Highlands Water in our capital program, for example, we had a capital program of $400 million, and we had to make some difficult risk-based decisions about what we put into this pricing submission. And as you could see, we were able to use this risk-based framework to put that down to about $256 million. And the rationale was that there was certainly some of those growth areas that we just didn't have certainty on at this point in time. So hence, under the risk, I suppose the R in Primo, we took a position around putting some money in years 4 and 5 to do the really important work that takes many years of planning, approvals, cultural heritage assessment. So we had several $1 million in years 4 and 5. And that was the logic, is to make sure that we've got some preliminary money to get prepared for what is likely to be the next growth areas after the Northern GIA. So hopefully that's provide a little bit of context for everybody on the call. And I'm not sure if the EC would certainly like to respond to the question as well.
Thanks very much, Jeff. That's very useful just to get that contextual piece from the business itself. And obviously there's some policy and other governmental processes that currently at play from the Commission's perspective in terms of the remit we have under the the review pricing submission. Marcus, did you want to add anything else in terms of what we can add to the conversation on that particular subject matter?
Probably just to clarify slightly, if something's excluded from the capital forecast, it doesn't mean it can't be done or won't be done. I guess it's the uncertainty at what time it's appropriate to allow for that in forward-facing pricing, that this is occurring at the end of the period. It's not saying don't do it. It's sort of saying, well, at what point in time do you recognise these things for costs? So whether it's done up front or whether if the money spent is just rolled into the asset base at the end of the regulatory period. As you saw in those forecast, businesses will often spend more than forecast because there is, as Jeff said, this risk-based component, how much you where and what is included. And I think at the moment, I'm sure Central Highlands may come back with further information saying, well, if the land hasn't been rezoned yet, is that premature to include? And there are ways, but none of this sort of says there's a very broad allowance for operating capital expenditure over the period that businesses can reprioritise, and they will do things that emerge during the period, just as they had to respond to the pandemic in the last one. So it's more a technical issue about the point in time when these things are recognised for pricing purposes and built into pricing.
Thanks very much, Marcus. Unless there's anything else that Jeff, the business, wanted to add, I might just go back to Darren and Natasha and everyone else around the table. Does that clarify an answer to your question, or is there anything else you wanted to add to that? It's the opportunity to add some more if you'd like.
Yeah, no, I think that sort of satisfies it, and Central Highlands have been fairly open and transparent with us with our discussions with them that they do have that ability to wing and wang, and sort of depending on the theme of the day and all those sorts of things. And we have another significant event in Ballarat, I suppose, called the Commonwealth Games that may. Our hope is that people will come to Ballarat and want to come and live here, so that may put an added pressure on our growth again. So being modest and saying that people will come and want to live here just throws it. But at the end of the day, if that option is still open, and that's probably all we're asking for, is that ability for Central Highlands Water to be able to wing and wang and go with the theme of the day.
Thanks very much, Darren. The utility of having direct stakeholder feedback in a conversation like this is that you've highlighted an issue that Central Highlands is obviously will have front of mind, and do you understand a little bit more about the framework in which we're going to assess and move from draft to final on that particular aspect? So that's great.
Thank you.
While I've got the developer representatives around the table, is there anything else that you wanted to raise in terms of the areas of focus the Commission should be looking at in terms of where we move from draft to final, or any other questions from the business? Just wanted to give you another opportunity to ask anything else that was front of mind for you.
I don't personally. Anyone else got any?
I think that's...
No, I think that was our sort of main one, and I think, just wanted to reiterate Central Highlands Water's ability there to engage with the development community, and I think their submission is sort of reflective of that. So
that's great. It's always good to hear from stakeholders in terms of the engagement process too that's occurred between individual stakeholders and the business. So that sounds like it's been a positive conversation, and one which has been conducive to understanding which are the key issues for you as developers, and Central Highland listening and responding to that as well. So that's very pleasing.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
No worries. Thanks very much for making the time to be here today as well. I'll open it up for more conversation as well and other queries, but Marcus, you've got your hand up, so feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to ask one as well to the developers. The transition over the period to the higher NCC charges, are you sort of comfortable with that approach?
Yeah, most definitely, and that was fairly, again, like I said, with the forums that we've had with Central Highlands and the workshops, they were very transparent and open about that. And I think at the end of the day, sort of the major percentage of developers in the room, and the feedback has been, again, at the end of the day, if it's providing permanent infrastructure and infrastructure they can use, they're more than, well, I wouldn't say happy to pay, but let's say they're more than happy to put their hand in their pocket if there's that end result. And I think, unfortunately, with the growth that we've had over the past few years, there's been a lot of times where developers have had to put their hand in their own pocket to provide interim temporary solutions just because of the rate of growth to facilitate that. And although that's worked well with Central Highlands Water from a delivery point of view, I think they probably agree that we've ended up with more temporary assets than they would like. And from a developer point of view, we've probably delivered more than we would like. So I think, again, that planning, and if that means the planning comes out and there's increased contributions to facilitate permanent infrastructure, it's more than welcome.
Yeah, so the concern, you think, for the development community is just an orderly rollout of infrastructure and being able to hook in when necessary, and the higher charges, if that facilitates that, that's something that you're quite supportive of. Yeah,
and I think Phil did mention it in passing in his. It's just with the current situation, how you sort of transition that and how that impacts on existing growth areas and those sorts of things. So there's no sort of imbalance there, that people that are developing today don't get caught up in the new NCCs and everything else. So it's not an easy task, I understand that, but it's fair to say the development community are keen to come along for the ride and sort of help Central Highlands out and how that looks.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Marcus and Darren. Just before I close off on that particular aspect, Jeff, is there anything else from a new business's perspective you wanted to just touch on as well? Just an opportunity there if you'd like.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, and thanks, Darren and Marcus. They were good questions and conversation, and certainly reflective of our understanding of the journey that we've been on. We know it's been difficult. There is lots of uncertainty that we're dealing with. As Phil said, we've done a lot of modelling in this space, a lot of master planning, but we've been really sensitive around the importance of a transition, particularly around our new customer contributions, and ensuring that it's sending the right price signals, but we're also mindful of price shock as well. So we thank the development community for their engagement, and also the conversation piece around, I think, it was raised around temporary assets. I mean, that has been clearly frustrating, where we've sort of result in building temporary pump stations, where a little bit more forward planning, possibly a bit more funding and some investment through new contributions gives us that confidence to be able to maybe make the call and invest in some permanent infrastructure that avoids those unintended sort of results of abandoning assets, after 4 or 5 years. So yeah, we certainly look forward to working with the development community to try and avoid those situations as much as we can.
Thanks very much, Jeff. We look forward to the additional information the business will provide to us on that particular aspect, so we can consider that before we move to a final decision on those aspects. But that's been a very useful conversation. Thanks very much for everybody's engagement on that. I'm watching the time, and I'm also keen to get any other queries or feedback from stakeholders. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to add a query or add some feedback for the business or the commission? Please feel free to pop your hand up or pop something in the chat. And team, please let me know if I'm missing anyone's hands up. I don't think I am, but absolutely want to make the most of an opportunity there if there was more to add into the conversation. Anything from the team's perspective that we needed to raise today, or that was of interest for us to hear from either the business or other stakeholders? And if there's not, team, I imagine it would be okay if we move to close the session at some point, but I don't want to cut anyone off if they're thinking or dwelling on a question to add into the conversation. So just pause for a moment just to make sure. Otherwise, team, let me know if that's okay to then start to close out the conversation a little bit earlier than the full hour, which I don't like to do, but if there are no questions, there's no point in sitting here and you listening to my voice alone. All right, team. Well, with that in mind, let's the team will put the slide up in terms of next steps. So why don't we move to that? Look, I think this has been a really useful conversation on some key issues where we're seeking feedback in our draft decision. NCCs was one of them, so thanks for that conversation today. Now, between now and the 12th of May, which is when submissions close, I really encourage you and any other teams online to liaise with Marcus and the Commission's water team. They're available to field any questions you have. I know we've already got a submission, I think, from Integra, but if there's anything more you'd like to add into that engagement process, please feel free. That Engage Victoria website link is on that slide there the team have put up. So on behalf of Commission staff, thanks very much for joining us today and your time. It's been valuable to hear your thoughts, and thanks also to Jeff, Philip and Philippa from the business for presenting and having a useful discussion on particular aspects as well. We're really looking forward to continuing to hear any further feedback until the 12th of May. And the team have just put up all of those details in terms of connecting with us to engage and provide any further feedback or submissions. So on that note, thanks very much for your attendance today and making the time. And I'll now close the meeting. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.